Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Veterans EIC panel. Today, I'd like to thank Teresa Rainey, Mike Garcelano, and Renee Joaquin for helping me put this together. Without them, I wouldn't have been able to do this. Appreciate it, guys. A little bit about myself. I served in the military for 16 years. I was injured and medically retired a few years back. I faced a great deal of challenges, physically, emotionally, financially, and that all changed when I moved to the state. I found great care with a VA system that has taken care of me and continues to take care of me today. I landed a job with the Oregon Employment Department that allowed me to give back to my veterans and gave me a sense of duty and service and a paycheck also. What I'd like to do next is introduce our esteemed director, Kay Erickson. She's going to say a few words.
So good morning. Kay Erickson, Director of the Oregon Employment Department and the loving sponsor of the department's Equity and Inclusion Council. So I'd like to step back from the mic, maybe. I'd like to welcome our honored panelists who will be introducing themselves shortly, I believe, those in the audience and those who are participating remotely for taking the time to join us today and learn a little bit more about the diverse experiences, successes, and challenges of being a veteran in today's society. I'd also like to thank our panelists for helping to foster a sense of belonging for our employees and for telling your stories today. And finally, thank you all for your support of a positive, safe, and learning environment.
All right, at this time, I'd like to ask the panelists, starting at my right, to introduce themselves, their name, branch of service.
Hi, my name is Maribel Armendariz, U.S. Army veteran. I served from 1989 to 1990, and my job in there was a mobile subscriber equipment operator. So basically, I used to provide cell phones for the tanks.
Good morning. My name is Isaac Levi. I've been with the Oregon Employment Department for about 3 years now. I was in the U.S. Coast Guard for 4 years, from 2012 to 2016. And when I exited the service, I was an avionics electrical technician. So basically, anything electrical on an aircraft I played with.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Garcelano. I work in human resources as a classification recruitment partner. And I was in the Navy from 1999 to 2005 as a Fleet Marine Force corpsman, AKA medic, for those who are unfamiliar with that.
I'm Liz Estabrooks. I am currently the Oregon Women Veterans Coordinator. I'm a U.S. Army veteran. I was in for 3 years. I joined in December 1977 and exited in December 1980. My MOS was 76 Delta, which was supply, and I served in Kitzingen, Germany during my 3 years, well, after basic and AIT, so that was what I did.
Hello, I'm Heather Weiland. I was in the United States Air Force from 1980 to 1988. My first career field was explosive ordnance disposal. My second career field was medical administration or medical resource management, so I worked with corpsmen. I'm currently the procurement manager here at the employment office, and I think that's about it.
That's just about it. You do a lot. My name is Jim Monger. I'm currently right now the Veterans Program Coordinator for the state of Oregon. I served in the United States Army for 6 years. During that time frame, well, I did a lot of different roles at that, but I wasn't a regular Army. I was a crew chief on UH-60 Blackhawks. When I got out, I was a senior crew chief instructor for a medevac unit, which was assigned to Fort Campbell and Fort Knox, so we had a lot going on.
Thank you guys so much for your introductions.
Thank you all for being here. This question is for Liz. Can you tell us more about your role as the Oregon Women Veterans Coordinator and the resources you can offer women who are veterans?
Sure, I'm happy to, thank you. So my position actually started in January 2016. It was under House Bill 3479. And my role is to provide services to the 25,000 plus women veterans in the state of Oregon. And what that means is if a woman veteran in this state needs services, that's what I do, and no matter where she is in the state. So that might mean directing her towards her claim benefits, towards her education benefits. It might mean, for instance, I had a woman call me this week who had her identity stolen and helping direct her towards how she can get help in straightening that out. It doesn't mean that I personally do that because I don't have that much skill. It means that I know who I send her to. Depending on what county she is in, I direct her to the county VSO or to any one of the resources I have at my disposal. I'm not a VSO, so I don't file claims, but I might be with her throughout the claims process. For instance, a woman that I've been working with since one of the very first women veterans that I connected with when I got my job in January 2016. Women don't just immediately file claims because they connected with me. This woman I've been working with for almost 4 years, she finally decided to file her claim in about June. But I've been working with her all of this time because she gets very close and then she backs off. And then she gets very close again and she backs off because it's a very difficult process. I think every woman that I've ever consulted with experienced harassment and or sexual assault when she was in the military. And so it's a very difficult process. And it takes a lot to move forward with that claim. So she might want to, but something might stop her. And so this woman I've been working with all of these years, and she finally decided to do it. And I'm happy to say that she was successful, but it was not an easy process. So I work with them over the 3 years, over the 1 year, over the 6 months, and maybe they decide to right away. But I'm a social worker, and I actually have an MSW. But I'm their social worker, I'm their resource, I'm their whatever it is that they need at that moment, whether they're in Burns, Oregon, or in Portland. I might call you, you might call me, we might call 15 other people in the state. But that's how it works that's what I do for women veterans in the state of Oregon. Was that enough?
Yes, ma'am. All right, our next question is for Isaac Levi. Isaac, can you tell us about why you joined the military?
Yeah, absolutely. So my pathway to the military is kind of interesting. So going through my high school years, I was in the Boy Scouts of America, and that really kind of developed a sense of service and looking for purpose. And from that early age, as I went through and I finished high school, about that time my parents went through a split. And so I was kind of at this place of, I really like to serve and I understand purpose. How do I go with that? And that realization of, I've got about $500 in my bank account, I'm gonna have to put a roof over my head. So of course I went and talked to the man in blue because he had the great news and said, hey, join the military, you get an opportunity to go to college, you get the opportunity to go into a great job that you probably wouldn't have the opportunity otherwise. So for myself, I said as an opportunity to better my life and give myself an opportunity to go somewhere and make something for myself that I wouldn't normally have that chance for somebody growing up in Idaho in a kind of a split family. So I saw it as a good opportunity and a way to serve and live a great life.
Thank you, Isaac.
Are there any others that would like to share their reason for joining the military? Anybody got a story?
Jim Monger again. Thank you for having me here today. The reason I joined really is at the time was in the late 80s. I was working in a sawmill as a young person, and I just knew that type of work was not for me. And I just made a decision. It was like, hey, I'm going to go join the Navy. Well, guess what? The Navy didn't want me. They kicked me out. I'm like, great, now what? So then the Army guy looked at me. He's like, hey, come on over. We'll give you a job. So I went down, talked to the Army recruiter. He wanted me to go to Pathfinder school. And I said, what's that? And he said, well, you'll be going through the jungles, do all this stuff. It's like, that's not Jim. And he said, what else you want to do? It's like, well, I'm pretty good at mechanicking, right? So that's how I got into working on helicopters, and that led into several different roles throughout my 6-year career in the Army, which took me all over the world. Took me into combat zones. It took me into actually being not really playing Army, but actually doing real life Army stuff, even when the no wars were going on at that time in the 90s. So, but that's the reason I went in, is just to kind of get away from that one particular employment realm at the time that was in the area that I grew up in, to do something different, and that was the opportunity.
So I joined the military, first of all. I came from a single parent home. So my options were financial aid, go to junior college, work full or part-time, whichever you could find. So I was going to school, working full-time almost, and going to a junior college. And I said, oh, this isn't what I want to do at this time. I said, what else can I do? And I always thought about the military because I had some relatives in what it used to be ROTC, and I said, this sounds like something interesting, like him. I went to the Air Force, I went to the Navy. I was like, oh, we're not taking people at this time. I said, okay. So I went to the Army. I said, I don't want to be a cook, but I want to be outside. And they said, okay, so we have this, and at the time it was a 72 Echo. If you ever looked at Robin Williams' Good Morning Vietnam, it's that machine that puts out the paper. And so I said, okay, I could do that. So I ended up working for them in the service as a tactical support unit, which means that I ended up spending 265 days out of the year playing war games. Anywhere from the tundra, from Alaska, to Germany. So when you see things happening, playing tag, playing out there in the middle of nowhere, that would have been us.
I was told to get right close to the mic. No, don't kiss it. Okay, this is for Heather Weiland. What cultural or social challenges did you experience during your time in the military? And do you see them reflected in today's world?
Thank you. I wrote mine down just so I would stay on track. During my time in the military, I was exposed to several instances of discrimination and harassment based upon my gender. These instances included my instructors, my peers, my supervisors, and other servicemen in general. One example was a classmate who refused to work with me during a training exercise because I was a woman. He flat out said in front of me, the class, and our instructor that this is why he didn't want to work with me, and no actions were taken. Although there were several more severe experiences during my training and military career, I don't choose to go into those at this time. Although I see much less of this occurring in the military since leaving, the military is still a place where discrimination is prevalent and often unchecked. And this is based upon my knowledge and experience working for the Oregon Military Department as a civilian contract specialist from 1998 to 1999. At that place, I was harassed and degraded while working there, as well as being sexually harassed, and nothing was done about it. I ended up having to leave and get a different job to end it. But I do see that even though this is still reflected in moderation or in general in today's world, it has certainly decreased in its frequency. And I'm very grateful that society is taking action and changes are being made.
Thank you, Heather. Would anybody else like to answer the question from the panel?
I'm always happy to speak to this. From a personal and professional perspective, my experience is the same as hers. When I was in from 77 to 80, I joined in 77, but I went to basic training in Fort Jackson in January 78. And they made it clear that women weren't welcome, and that continued until the end of my service, which is the reason I left. And it was not a welcoming environment for women, and that is one of the primary things that I help women that come to me with. It's oftentimes it's an ongoing. What I help them with is not sexual assault, but the fact that it was an ongoing issue of sexual harassment. It was every single moment of every single day if you were in uniform on a base, and that's a culture that you carry with you throughout the rest of your life. And so I think that's important for people. That does not mean that every woman veteran is broken. And I think that's important for everybody to understand, that we're not broken. It's something that we lived with, and it's something that we carry with us, but it does not follow that we are broken. So I think it's important that we all keep that in mind, but know that it's important that we recognize that continues to be a part of that culture, and it's something that we feel sensitive to. If it's in the culture that we are working in today. And so as people who are in the employment business, I think it's something that you need to be aware of. If a person expresses that to you, a person who's looking for a job, or if it's something that's in your own workspace, to be cognizant of that, me too, and to take that seriously if somebody expresses that to you, that's happening, or that they are aware that it's a real thing, that the comments and the experiences are a reality for so many. That sense of safety has to be present for women, because if it's not, we're not going to do a good job at work. And it's something that I remember every single day, even though I got out of the Army in December 1980. It's something that I still remember. It's something that interrupted my career. And one of the things that we know is that for women whose career was interrupted in the military, that has an impact on homelessness. It has an impact on their health. And so if you're having struggles helping people find work, help them in other ways, help them to find those referrals outside the employment. If you're counseling them on employment and they continue to find difficulty with their employment, help them find those other community resources, because that culture continues to hang on in our today's world.
Anyone else? All right, thank you both for your answers. Next question is for Mike. Mike, after leaving the military, many veterans struggle to find their purpose. If you were fortunate enough to have found yours after the military, how did you get there? And for those who helped you get there, what roles did they have in your life or career? What advice can you give to those who are still looking for their purpose and belonging after the military?
Thank you. I think I can only answer 2 of those 4 or 5 questions. I've also typed mine up just to kind of keep me on track. But my journey in searching for my purpose and belonging, I truly feel it's still ongoing. A few years after leaving the military in 2015, I really had to restructure my approach. And as unfortunate as it may sound, I've come to accept then that there will always be a void for after you've served so many years, you go through so many experiences with such a tight-knit group. You're out there doing jobs that on the civilian side is very few can really compare. So I had to restructure that, and I just had to approach it with a mindset that will always be a void, and that it's not fair to look for that on the civilian side. I just believe that the military, once you've served, gives you this experience that you get to form a bond, a camaraderie, and so unique. And I don't think my personal experience is there's really nothing on the civilian side that it's equivalent to. I've looked into law enforcement after the military. Obviously, I'm not in it. Didn't make it past the written exam. But the military provides a unique environment, and you get to build this bond with the person to your left and to your right, and knowing that they got your six no matter what. So, and that's my personal experience, and I've learned to just really just structure my mindset that it's not fair to look for that outside of the military. So so that comparison was not apples to apples. One advice that I can give, though, that I wish I had when I got out 14 years ago, is look for a mentor, and maybe someone who's had to navigate the same journey getting out of the military, and maybe someone who held the same position and found success on the civilian side. And nowadays, we've got so many social platforms. LinkedIn alone, there's a plethora of resources. So many coaches out there who offer, whether it's paid, preferably unpaid. But there's so many of that these days that I wish I had that when I got out. But I ended up just kind of, in a way, doing it on my own, and I was fortunate to eventually rejoin the workforce after the military. So thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Would anyone else like to speak to this question, their purpose, finding it, how they got there?
So when I got out, my husband was already out. I met him while he was in service too. And we were fortunate enough to move to an area where there was a Veterans Administration. And so I went to the local junior college, met a vet rep there, and he guided me and was very influential. So I usually just sought out people that had been vets before that kind of understand what you're going through and can guide you to the path. I ended up studying at a Veterans Rep Administration with other females, other males that had similar experience, that said, this is what you can do, this is your path. You could do this with a criminal justice degree, and again, it's that void. I was serving in a unit 10-to-1 male, so I was only maybe 1 female and 10 males. So me working with a male was we were at the same level because I had to earn my worth. And that was carrying the same amount of stuff they carried, punching a rod in the floor, even frozen. But I'm also very intuitive when a male doesn't want to work with you. Very much so. I'm getting nervous. So anyways, but that was my path. And when I left junior college, I went to the university. I also sought a mentor there, and they had a great VA rep. And so those are the people that guided me.
Thank you, Maribel. Anyone else? All right, Jim.
So correct me if I get off track here. So when I get out of the Army, one of the biggest things, and I think it was mentioned several times, is you lose a couple things. You lose that family, that military family, that close-knitness of the team that you worked with. And I think that's a huge loss mentally, right? And then the other is you lose your identity, right? So when I got out, I was somebody in the military. But when I got out, nobody on the outside could recognize what I did, even when I explained it to the individuals trying to help with employment or training. And, the government has such a way of being so rigid where they just want to pigeonhole you. It's like, oh, hey, Jim, you were a helicopter mechanic, and guess what? You can work on aircrafts, and we want you to work on aircrafts. It's like, well, that's not the job I really did, even though I can do it. My job actually in the military advanced over the years, and I became like a trainer and so to speak. And I think most of us here on the panel held multiple jobs during our short time frames or long time frames that we're in. So I think those are the two biggest things for me. And then kind of making that transition, it really didn't hit me until I was actually out and I was back in Oregon. And that's where that no moment kind of hit in, right? It's like, now what? And so I just had to figure things out. I had the GI Bill. Great, I'm going to go back to school. And I think that GI Bill really kind of helped out. I kind of had a vision of where I wanted to go. And believe it or not, I did not expect to work for the Oregon Employment Department. That was not my major goal getting out. So I'm a firm believer in like happenstance. It just happened to be working, doing VA work study at the Eugene Medical Clinic. And one of the DevOps from the Eugene office, Gary McElroy, seeing how well I worked with the homeless veterans I was working with to get them employed, and invited me to go over to work at the Eugene Employment Office. So that's kind of by happenstance, and I just kind of found another niche.
Thank you, Jim. Anyone else?
I'll share on this real quick.
Okay.
I think a lot of us talked about is that when we were in the military, we had brothers and sisters. We were really a very tight-knit family, and that started honestly from day one when most of us got off that bus at boot camp. And a lot of us struggle, I think, personally I do, is transitioning through the civilian side and with your coworkers. We don't have that at work. And like Michael talked about, it's almost you come to expect that to not be there, and it's kind of not fair to expect that. And one of the ways is you see a lot of veterans will kind of cling together. A little louder, okay. We'll kind of cling together and become a team, and it's that instant camaraderie. And I think when it goes to mentors, kind of like Jim was talking about, called up Jim one day, worked as a work study. Still can't get away from Jim. Now he's my boss again somehow. And Steve over there is a DevOps. Really good mentors to have. So even within the employment department for myself, through my transition was somehow I happenstance, like Jim brought up, into some really great mentors. And I think having that as veterans transition within an agency is vital for that transition to be work for a veteran.
Thank you.
I want to piggyback on that and say it's very important. A lot of times veterans, I myself went decades without exploring my benefits, because when you get out, they tell you, you can't ever get benefits because blah, blah, blah. And so you believe them because you're 19 and stupid, or 21 and stupid, or because they told you so. And so you get into your 40s, and I always say veteran bodies age different than other bodies. And so things start to fall apart, or like I didn't, because when I was in, I didn't have access to educational benefits the way other veterans do. And yeah, and so I was in my 40s dating a DevOps, and I was complaining about my knees, and he said, "Didn't you say you were in the military? How come you haven't applied?" And so getting people, that's a long way around saying getting people connected to DevOps and to the VA and to VSOs is so important, because otherwise they might go a really long time not understanding what their benefits are. So at every opportunity, one of the things that ODVA is really big on is getting people connected at every opportunity to a DevOps, to a VSO, to the VA, because at every opportunity that when we can get a veteran connected, that's health benefits, that's money, that's education, that's something in their pocket and in their family security that they didn't have before. So that's whether they just got out yesterday or 15 years ago, you might be that important connection that they didn't have yesterday.
Thank you. This one is for Maribel. How do you feel that your service has shaped who you are today?
Going in the service, I already had a high work ethic. Now, you go into the service, you live with someone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You develop this trust with them that's uncomparable. So your work ethic now, it's doubled or tripled, because you don't want to let that person next to you down. You're also trained mentally from day one, is that no matter what's in front of you, that task can be accomplished. Doesn't matter what it is, you're gonna get it done. So your work ethic now is kind of tripled. The other thing is that you're expected to work at a high level every single day. From the day, and when I was there, it was in a dorm room. It was, you shared a room with 4 females. and it was 4 rooms. So from the time you got up, you were with them. You know, it was a very structured environment, so I knew who was at my level, and I knew who wasn't at my level. So the structure, the chain of command was always there. If I didn't like something, I could tell them something, whether it was something high-ranking officer. I said, you know, this is wrong, this is this. They listen to you. In the civilian sector, I find myself that I have to taper back my communication. And I call it my fluff, because everybody wants to be fluff, and I don't have that fluff. As women know, we are very direct. We speak our minds, and so I've had to learn how to taper it back. So that is my work ethic, and not apologizing. When we do our work, we do our work, and we're there to work at 100%. And if I do something wrong, we'll admit to doing something wrong, or take fault for it. Yes, I told her to do that. Well, why did you tell her? Because I thought this. Because that's what we were trained to do. The other thing is, like I said, we work with males. Males, you earn their respect, and you work very hard. Sometimes they don't respect you. Sometimes they berate you, but at least you're there, and you're getting the job done. I've been bypassed in the service for promotions just because I was a female, and it was because the other person had a family. Well, that was very common. You probably experienced that as well. Here, at least, you do your work the same, but it's not based on what school you've gone to. It's not based on how you did at the school, what you scored at a test. Here, it's based on your work ethic and how you did your job and how you interview. And over there, we do the same things, but it's more structured. And I think, to me, that what I've lost in the service and my work ethic is the more defined structure. And while there's structure here in the workforce, in the civilian sector, the structure in the military sector is a lot more different. We are our peers. I could tell somebody what I think, and it's a conversation. We'd still do the job. And it's not that emotions are as much a part of it. It's more of the job at task.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Need the question repeated? It's been a long time.
How do you feel that your service has shaped who you are today?
I had several jobs by the time I got into the military. I started work prior to 13 years old, and I had developed a work ethic from that point forward. But when I got into the military, it was step your game up a couple times. And in my second career field in medical resource management, I worked in the hospital. And you can't call in sick, and you can't do any of those things that we as civilians get to do. Is it all the way up to here? Sorry. So your work ethic, you learn to work when you're sick, you work when you don't feel good, you work when your family member is having a crisis, because you are the job. I was a single mother, and I had very difficult times finding like daycare and things like that, but you did it. And one of the things that I have carried forward today, just because you have to value your time and set your structure to comply with it, is I always lay my clothes out at night still, so that I know I can just jump into my clothes and go to work. But it did help me to create a better work ethic, to look at the job as something more than just a job. In the military, you are the job, and your work reflects on who you are. And if you don't have that high expectation for yourself, you certainly can't lead anybody and have them respect you, because you have to build respect. You can't just get respect. Even though you have rank, doesn't mean that your people will follow you or do something behind you. So I found that to be very important, especially after I got out of the military and started working in even more challenging environments.
So how the military shaped me. I got a couple people in the audience that can probably answer that better than me, but I'll do the best I can. So I think one of the things is my time in the military was kind of interesting on just my experience is sometimes I was assigned to do things without even asking, right? It's kind of like being voluntold. And so, again, it was in the medevac unit, and I was a crew chief in medevac, and I just did my job and did it very well. But I was very caring about what I did. At the time, I was only an E4, which is a specialist in the Army, so you're not really that sergeant or non-commissioned officer rank. And our platoon sergeant and the first sergeant basically pulled me off to the side and told me I was going to be the new senior crew chief instructor for a medevac unit. Now, medevac unit is really attached to a division, right, in the military, sort of like a post. Part of the role is now you're responsible for for training, basically, all the crew chiefs of the unit and the medics, and making sure they can do all their flight performance tasks and all their learning. And so that was new, and they had their NCOs. This was like one of those jobs people wait in line for. But when I was told I was going to do it, and I wasn't waiting in line to do that job, caused a lot of difficulty at the unit. So I get a lot of folks who outranked me, made my life a little bit miserable for about 6 months. And but that just kind of gave me that leadership role, that opportunity to just expand. And I think what I take away from the military is the ability to take on a new role and shape it and try to make it just a little bit better than what I found it in. Or, just maybe help it change directions that it needs to go to. And I think all of us can kind of relate to that when we get into a new role and we bring that military experience with us. And this is kind of how we adapt and help whatever we're doing improve.
All right, thank you so much. Our next question is for Jim Monger. What do you want your colleagues to know about working with veterans?
Don't be scared. We're people too, right? You'll probably be working next to a veteran sometime either now or in the future, and you won't know it unless they tell you or you ask. And it's just who we are. We come into the workplace. We're very aware of our surroundings, right? And then we can adapt. And we may not, I remember when I first started working in the employment office, some of my coworkers were a little scared of Jim because Jim, was still a little bit of rigid, right, from the military. 25 years later, it kind of softened up a little bit, more approachable, smile a little bit more, all that good stuff. But, we're just adaptable. We really buy into what we're doing. And, it's hard. Yeah, just don't be afraid of us, right?
Anybody else on that one?
The thing I would add is don't assume that men are veterans and women aren't, because that's a very frequent assumption. Women may not say they're veterans, so if they come in wearing something that says Navy or Army, do not ask them if their husband served, because that happens quite often. And ask women, when you're working with women, ask them if they served in the military instead of if they're veterans, because a lot of times women will answer no when you ask them if they're veterans. But if you ask them if they served in the military, they'll say yes. So change your question.
I was just talking to Renee about that. I was at Winco in Cornelius one day because I live in Forest Grove, and I was driving, and I got out of the truck, and somebody said, "Thank your husband for your service, for his service." I said, "I will, but those are my plates."
Another thing, too, about messages to colleagues is that, as you heard today, we all have vast experience. And I don't really think many of us mentioned what rank we were. We talked more about what roles we played. But we have very, very differing experiences that we can actually bring to the workplace. And when you're working with your colleague and you find out that they're a veteran, just basically ask them, hey, what did you primarily do? Or what was your favorite role that you did in the military? And see if you can get that person to maybe share that story with you or that experience. And it could tie into a project maybe that you're doing. It could learn a little bit more about their background. I know for myself, I do not like sharing a lot about myself. And so when I got into this particular role as a State Veterans Program Coordinator, Ariel Derringer was assigned to come over and ask me questions about what I did, and I would give her like short military replies, right? And then she finally came over and she had her tablet and her pencil, and she says, I need more. So I go, okay, I'll give you some more information. I'll give you some more information. So again, it's just kind of how I am, and some other vets could be the same way. Just they give short, quick answers. And if you want a longer answer, just ask them, hey, can you give me a little more detail? And hopefully they will.
Thank you, Jim. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll share something really quick.
All right.
I think, especially with myself, as veterans, we understand the value of diversity in teams. When I talk about the family aspect, and from day one, when you get off that bus, you turn and you look, and everybody's from a different background, and that continues throughout your entire career. And I think that carries over into, as we make that transition and to the private and public sectors where we work, that we understand how that impacts and really adds value to teams.
Thank you, Isaac.
I would like to add to that.
Okay.
Thank you for pointing that out. I think one of the most memorable events that occurred when I was in the military, I had finally qualified for base housing. And so I moved in, and base housing, as you know, you have everybody of every rank except for the officers. But my kids we had a central playground behind all the houses that all the kids would run and play in. And I remember my kids coming in one specific day, and they'd been playing with the neighbors on both sides of us, and they came in and said, so-and-so did this, and it was so fun. And I said, well, which one's so-and-so? And they said, the one with the black hair. All the children out there had black hair. We had Asians on one side, we had African Americans or Native, and I think we even had a Native American, and all the children have black hair. And I thought, how beautiful that my children don't understand what bias and discrimination and all of that stuff is. And to this day, both of my kids are still that way.
Thank you, Heather. At this time, we'd like to open up questions to the audience and also to those tuning in digitally. So if anybody has any questions, go ahead, let us know.
Hey, how's it going? There we go. So it's kind of a lighthearted question, but still kind of important. So I've been here about a month now. 6 years Navy, by the way. So I'm a veteran as well. I've been here about a month now at the Employment Department, about 4 months in state service as a whole. I just got out of school. So my question is, I've discovered that I say sir or ma'am to people almost immediately, especially when I meet someone new. It's a sir or a ma'am as I'm introduced to people. And as I get to know them, that'll change, and I'll start using their first name. Management, though, it takes a little bit longer. If I'm talking to a senior manager, and I had a question recently. Someone said, so that's not sir or ma'am, that's Jacqueline. That's, trying to correct me. And it was a joke, and we talked about it. I haven't figured out a way to explain that, why I default to sir and ma'am so easily, and why. Do you have any advice or thoughts on that?
Open, anyone?
I would say just stick whatever that you're comfortable with and replying to. When I was in the Army, I was Army Aviation, so it wasn't really the Army. It was a little bit different, more relaxed. We just had our different style of work. I worked alongside of officers and called them by their first names. Of course, you had to play the Army game if someone, really high-ranking was around, and you'd have to address them appropriately. But calling someone sir or ma'am, if that's what you're comfortable with, I would just say stick with it, and maybe over time, you'll just slowly adapt or change, and I wouldn't try to force it.
Hi there. Thanks for doing this, by the way. I know some people who, when they are applying for state positions, they are not checking the veterans box. And when I ask them why, what several have told me is that they didn't serve in combat, and so they don't feel right about checking that box. And I, of course, encouraged them to do so, but I didn't really have a good answer for them. I just wanted to hear what you think about that, and what do you tell folks when they give you that answer?
I'll let her answer the appropriate way. For me, it was very difficult for when people say, oh, thank you for your service, you're a vet. I'm not a wounded vet. I'm not a disabled vet. I did serve during some times of conflict, but to my peers that are veterans that are disabled, they're the ones that take more of an honor than I do.
I always just tell people, if you served in the military, you're a veteran, and I would encourage you to give them that answer. You don't have to have served in combat to be a veteran. You can say that we can refer to combat veterans as combat veterans, but anybody who served in the U.S. military is a veteran, and you can go ahead and check that box on their behalf. Yeah. Yeah, because that veteran preference is really important to them getting that preference for a job.
Would you agree? My other argument that I have used is that it's helpful for other folks who have served in the military to have them there in the workforce. So I've tried that route too, but actually what I hear is there's that sense of, I don't know, honor about not having served in combat and not being wounded. And so I wanted to push, but I also feel better about getting a little bit of permission from you all to say, yeah, go ahead and check it for them. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to back that one up. Definitely, if they served in the United States military and they meet the definition to select that box, tell them to select the box. I'm a combat veteran. I'm a disabled veteran. I view everybody on this panel as equals to me. I don't believe I'm above them. I don't below them. They're all same. They're all veterans. So if they meet the criteria, check the box.
I believe there's an online question.
So from our webinar, someone asked, what do you recommend women who are currently in the military do if they experience harassment, abuse, or assault?
Report it.
Well, report it is an easy answer, but that's not always a solution. It depends on your chain of command. There are two different options for reporting. There's restricted and unrestricted. Sometimes you're talked out of one or the other. If you can report it safely, report it. If you feel comfortable, report it. If you can't report it for whatever reason, make sure that you somehow get it reported to a family member, write a letter home, let somebody know about it. Make sure you have documentation in some form so that when you get out of the military, you can file a claim, and you can, in that claim, show that you sought, like if you see a psychologist or somebody off base, because filing a claim is your due when you get out of the military. So what that means is you need to set a record of that harassment and that assault. And the best way to do that is to be able to have some kind of record. So if you're being assaulted or harassed on base and you're not comfortable reporting that incident, you can write a letter home to mom and dad, ask them to save that letter. You can go see a psychologist or a doctor off base. Make sure you maintain, you know who that is so you can get that medical record when you leave the military. You can do any of those kind of things so that when you get out of the military, you can access those records and those letters and give that to your veteran service officer so that when you file your claim, you can present that as evidence. And I'm really sorry that's happening to you. And I wish our U.S. military was better. They're not.
One
So I don't know if you heard that, but he said one other option is the Inspector General, which is an option and should be anonymous. Now I know that that there's supposed to be an option through the EEOO office that is supposed to be an option, but my understanding of that through an interview I did with them was that if you bypass your chain of command, it ultimately goes back around to your chain of command and ends up in their lap anyway. So that can be a problem for you.
And also, when that happens, if you are somebody that is reporting on behalf of a person, that person's going to be need a lot of support, because the female in the service is ostracized when they do claim. And not only by the chain of command, but also the peers around her. And even the female peers are asked not to have any communication with that female. So the ostracism is very harsh. So if you know somebody in the service that plans to be there, please provide that support.
Hi, I had a couple questions. One is, what is a Vsop? And the other one is, I was in the Navy, and my job was shore-based mostly. I was in anti-submarine warfare, so we listened to submarines mostly, and we served with quite a few women too. So I was always around women in my ranking, and we were a small group, so we had our own little bases. But I did hear afterwards from people after I left the Navy about situations, and so I didn't want my daughter to go in the military. I felt like some of the stories I heard were awful. But what I did also want to ask is I sometimes when I was in, nobody said thank you for your service. Now you hear that all the time. If you want to use a veterans discount, thank you for your service. I don't like it, because I don't feel like I was in a peaceful time. I lived in Bermuda. It was, Northern California. I didn't have any, I could have been if something had happened. They told us they could call us into other positions. They could move us really quickly into combat or other types of positions. But I just wonder how you feel. I mean, if I talk to veterans that have been shot at, I know a Navy medic that was in Fallujah. Those people, I think, for their service, their life was on the line. But mine, it's like a government job. It was, military, but at the same time, and also I was in an era when, it was almost kind of looked down on a little bit. So those are my two questions. Thank you.
I'll answer the second part and then let someone else answer the first half. As far as the thank you for your service and serving and you feel when you're disconnected, I would approach it as you still made the sacrifice and you made the decision to sign a piece of paper that says, I will at any time lay my life down for my coworkers and for my country, correct? So you still made that effort. And I look at it, you could have gone to college, you could have picked another out and enjoyed going home at 5 o'clock and not having that weight on your chest. So you made that decision. So I think it's a small way for America's, we don't really understand what veterans do, for them to just say thank you. And maybe there's been ideas of maybe you get a chance to educate or talk a little bit about your story and then kind of understand what you do. That kind of translate that. Maybe that kind of helps. But just, from my experience, I wasn't shot at, but I still was in a very active, very dangerous job every day. So I still I still was in an environment. So I don't know, does I kind of think about it.
And I apologize for using the acronyms. VSO is a veteran service officer. Every county has a veteran service officer, and they're the people who file claims. And they're also very knowledgeable about things like educational benefits and what's available to veterans.
The other acronym that was kind of thrown out there is DVOP, which is Disabled Veteran Outreach Program Specialist. And actually, it's a long title that Congress gave the position. And it's an employment rep that serves a targeted population of veterans that have significant barriers to employment. And we have great success with the program in the state of Oregon, so we're very proud of our DVOPs. And we have about 20 right now in the state. Actually, we're down to, so we got a couple of recruitment processes. So if you know someone, Gresham is looking to recruit here pretty quick. as far as being told, hey, thank you and for your service. Over the years, for me, it just kind of wears out. Right? It's like, oh, here's, thank you for your service. But I do appreciate the individuals for actually going out of their way to say it if it's not a company policy to say it, right? And that to me, I'll pause and I'll say, hey, well, thank you very much, and thank you for paying your taxes.
I could provide an answer to that one as well. I had a unique perspective in my career. Is I did half what we called kind of deployable green side. I was going to Iraq, and then I finished the last half doing the haze gray underway thing, big old ships floating around the ocean. And what I thought my whole career was I was the one doing the hard work, and these people had it made out there floating around, pulling into these fun ports. But once I got out there, I realized that stress tempo is the same. It might not be bullets coming at you, but it's doing things that are so dangerous that one miscalculation, somebody's losing life or limb. And that's service. Even when you're out there tracking contacts in the SOSUS nets and watching the Soviets back then and doing that, that's high stress, man. That's service. So I thank you for your service.
Hi, my name's Lisa, and I have a son that joined the Army right out of high school, and he was my only child. And for him to enlist during active war was a concern for me because when my father was in the Korean War, they didn't allow your only child to go off to war. And so for my son to volunteer, there was nothing I could do. My question to you, he came out just this last year after serving 8 years and became an E5 in the Army. I sent in this little loving boy, and I had this man that was closed off, and my struggle with him is learning how to communicate and also understand his lingo so that we could reconnect. Do you have any suggestions for me?
Thank you for sharing that, and I'm sorry that's what you're going through. One of the things that you can do, there's, the VA has vet centers. Are you from here in Salem? So the vet centers are wonderful places. They were started by Vietnam veterans, and they only do 3 things. They counsel for combat veterans, for military sexual trauma, and for bereavement. And they are staffed by veterans, and they are separate from the VA. There is one here in Salem, and the people who staff them are fabulous. And I would encourage him to go to the vet center and you don't have to be enrolled at the VA, you don't have to have a service-connected disability, but they do wonderful, wonderful work. Literally every single woman veteran I've sent to the vet center has done well. And I suspect it's the same for male veterans. And it's on Portland Road. So that would be my first recommendation. Also, they have groups. You can also, if he is not going to the mental health clinic at the VA in Portland or the health clinic here, I would recommend that.
Can I just add to something that I'm curious about? He served 3 tours. He was in Qatar, he was in Afghanistan, and he also served his last deployment was to South Korea when Kim was crazy. So when he came back, we had communicated, but I feel he suffers from PTSD that he's avoiding because if we have family get-togethers, there are some parts of it that he gets up and leaves the room or something, but I don't know how to approach him and counsel him or be there for him. So would these places that you're recommending be very helpful?
The vet center is fabulous. I would start with that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to add, so when I joined right out of high school, I was 17. My parents both actually had to sign a waiver to let me go, but I'm the youngest, one of 6. So if they lost me, they had 5 others. That would have been okay. But so many of what you shared I can relate to, and I think a factor to consider is just it could be just on his own time. He might get there, he may not, but just keep in mind that kind of find a balance of you're not imposing or you're not forcing things too much on your son. But I think hopefully it'll be on his own time and find that. And the gatherings, I think that's if it doesn't really make a big difference on the dynamic of the event itself, I'd say just let him be. And yeah, so that's what I can. Well,
I've had several friends that come back from the Middle East. They don't talk to civilians about what they experience, and they will not share with family. We segment our lives very well. So if he hasn't befriended a vet or someone with the same experience or the same lingo, because some terms that we use are not used in the civilian sector, they can relate to him. I've been at gatherings where a female spouse said, "My husband has never told me that." No, because there was 2 vets in the room, and that was my husband and myself. And so he shared an experience that that particular person had. But they will not share with family, just so you won't take the burden of the trauma.
Yeah, it's a very tough situation as a mom being, and you care about your son, obviously. As we heard, we got the vet centers. Other veterans can be a support group. So, think about the veteran of foreign wars if they have a chapter locally. But I was just thinking in my head, like, yeah, talking with other veterans is definitely helpful, especially if they served in the same area. It doesn't have to necessarily be the same time frame, or it could be a different part of the world that they served in combat in. As long as there's that relationship that your son can identify with, is definitely going to help. But the service organizations like the VFW, the DAVs, the American Legions, if they have the right individuals in those posts that he can connect up with and actually make a connection to, it's going to help. The other component too would be, I would probably try to find out, hey, what type of games did you play? And while you're in the military, were you into how did they spend his downtime? And just figure out, okay, did you play cards? Did you play video games? Did you, go and throw a Frisbee around? Just figure out what that was. And those might be simple questions that you can get a response to. And maybe go that direction to kind of get the family group to kind of, hey, let's play a big card game.
And speaking for the vet centers, they're an amazing resource. And they're staffed by all vets. There's nothing better than going in there and talking to a veteran about your veteran experience. Because sometimes you're just scared to share that with anybody because you're not, I've shared things before and you get a weird look afterwards. And then you're apprehensive. But that was key to my mental health journey and getting to wellness was I started at the vet center and then I started with groups. There's so many groups out there. And there's no better feeling than sitting in a room full of people and knowing they feel the same way you do. And hearing that lady say, I feel this way, and you're like, I thought I was the only one. When you are kind of hiding from the family because you're feeling a little weird. So, getting that togetherness is a big piece, and the mental health piece is just, it's huge too, so.
And one more thing, my mother, using my DD-214, joined the American Legion just so she could be around other vets and be supportive. That's also an option for you. And that way you can understand maybe some of the things that he experienced.
We have another question from the webinar, which is if anyone could share some about the different experiences men sometimes face in terms of harassment or discrimination. So any panelists who may have experienced or witnessed that, maybe to share some of that as well.
how the question was is if any men in the panel have experience with that kind of harassment or the difference between the harassment that we face versus maybe the harassment that women face. Personally, I could tell you from my personal story, it's a lot the same, and it happens a lot more than you would think to men as well, and it's definitely just like they're underreported on the women's side, it's hugely underreported on the men's side. And then there's a lot of bullying. Men like to bully men. I saw a lot of that, a lot of hazing, taping you up into a chair and pushing you in a corner. Some people call it fun, just depends on your definition, but we're changing that, I think. We're definitely changing that lens because now that doesn't happen anymore. But I'd say it's, whatever can happen to a woman can happen to a man, and it affects you just the same. It changes you. It can have negative effects, long lasting. So yeah, I think it can be the same, but I think statistically women have had it worse and been subjected to that more. Does that answer the question?
And I would add the same for men that I said about women, making sure that there's some kind of documentation so that they too can file a claim, making sure that they're writing a letter or telling a buddy or going to a psychologist off base if they're not comfortable doing it on base, so that they are entitled to file that same claim, but that they have some kind of evidence available if they choose not to report while they're in the service.
As Liz had mentioned earlier, that veteran bodies break down faster or break down differently than civilian bodies. What advice would you give to a veteran who pushes back on veteran benefits and veteran services on applying for those different services and benefits?
One of my jobs, I worked with the employment department in the past, was being a disabled veteran outreach program specialist and working with a lot of younger veterans getting out of the military and getting them connected with maybe a service-connected disability rating. And for the younger guys, it's kind of interesting, and even the women, is they view the injuries they suffered in the military. Oh, I'm fine, I can do my job now. Well, yeah, you're 24, you have aches and pains, but you still can function, right? And just explaining to the individual that what is it going to be like 6 years down the road, 10 years down the road, 25 years down the road, and getting them to see the long-term picture. Plus, it's not about getting the the big buy-in for a lot, from my experience, is it's not about the service-connected disability compensation that they receive. I tell them it's more about the medical care that you're going to receive later on in your life. And when they hear that and explain, like, hey, Uncle Sam put aside money for you. You're not taking it away from another vet. It's there for you. And once they kind of get those two pieces connected together, it's easier for them to make the connection with our veteran service officers to gather up that documentation, and that way they can submit their claim successfully.
That's spot on. I would also say that a lot of times veterans say they just don't, I just want the health care, I don't want the money. And I say, that's a really good point. So what you can do is you can take the money and set it aside in an account for, like one woman said to me, I don't want their dirty money. And I said, okay, but you've got 6 kids, right? So put the money aside into a bank account, and so when your kids need, say, a new dress for prom or a car, you've got that money over there, and you can use that money for that. And she said, oh, okay, I could do that. And one guy, he had been an officer, and he said, I just want the hearing aids. I don't want the money. I don't need the money. I just need the hearing aids. And I said, okay, cool. Put the money in a bank account. And so when your grandkids want something, and he said, oh, I said, yeah, you could have a trust fund for your grandkids. And he said, okay, cool. And then one woman said, well, but I don't really want the money. And she said, I don't believe in entitlements. And I said, so if you worked for Nike, and if you worked for Nike and you got hurt on the job, would you take workman's comp? And she said, of course I would. I said, think of this as workman's comp. You were in the military, you got hurt, ergo, you need workman's comp. And she said, oh, of course, okay. And she got right with it. So there are a lot of different ways when they push back that you can find an argument to overcome their pushback.
Good morning, everyone. I hope that's not too loud. I spent 35 years in the Navy, and during that time, I patterned my career to be able to fit with something when I retired. So I retired as the 4th most senior HR professional in the Navy. I worked on getting my MBA in HR management, but when I retired, I talking to the DevOps, and the big words that I heard from them was, Jim, you're a unicorn. And they really had a hard time helping me because I did pattern my career and my education to try and find something when I retired. Now that I'm employed with the OED now, and I love it because it fits right in that same ballpark of taking care of people that I did for 35 years in the Navy. But my concern is for the DevOps out there who get someone like me who's educated and experienced, and it's a little different, as you all know, it's different, the things that we do in the Navy or in the military, even though it's the same career choice in the civilian world, they are completely different. So what is something that you can talk to the DevOps about to give them insight and advice on how to talk to people that are, quote, unicorns?
I think that's for you, Jim.
Yeah, great question. So I didn't know you're a unicorn, but I'll keep that one in mind for the future. So I've worked with a lot of different veterans over the years, helping them transition into different careers on the civilian side. So working with the DevOps, I would definitely let them know to take you for the experiences that you bring forward, and to help try to unravel, so to speak, like the military Navy language of stuff, right? And to see if one is like, I would have you try to educate me on what you did. That way I can kind of think on either the civilian side or maybe state government, federal government side, where would be a natural fit that you'd be interested in applying to, right, and working at. So, and that's just communication and taking the time to listen and looking at the education that you bring from that military or those other educational institutions, and how can I help you fit in. So, yes, our DevOps across the state, they do the best they can. Some are really outstanding, and others are tremendous. We all have our different skill levels, right, and experiences, and we bring to the board. And I know they communicate with each other across the state. So that's, yeah. So that's my answer for the unicorn. So, and again, it's just a matter of our DevOps making connections with the vet and figuring out where they want to be, looking at what they're bringing forward, and what can we do to unravel it to make sure that the civilian population can understand what we're talking about.
Question. What sort of outreach do you do to actively look for veterans who recently left the military?
I can speak to that one, Jim. You got it?
Yeah, I'll do a little bit of it. And so part of what we do at the employment office is, for one, most of your veterans that get, not all, but most of the veterans who get out of the military will file for unemployment insurance. And then we can always look at that list to send them welcome letters and say, hey, come on into the Oregon Employment Department, and we'll see what we can do about your, where you want to be for work. Also, like with the Coast Guard folks, we partner up with that particular organization about every year. And we actually go in and we do what they call, it's Transition Assistance Programs, the name I call it, but they changed the name of it. And what that is the DevOps and the workforce staff will actually go to a site on the Coast Guard base, and they'll spend 30 minutes to an hour explaining what Workforce Oregon can do for them to help them with their transition. But not only that, but we'll address the Americans Job Centers across the nation. So if that Coast Guard person who's leaving from Coos Bay goes back to their home, which could be in Tennessee, we will get them the appropriate connections ahead of time before they get out. And we just want to make sure that the transition plan that they develop while they're in the military, they can carry that out when they get to their home state. And then there's the other aspect is, Isaac, do you want to?
I was just gonna say one way is you can like leverage, social media, LinkedIn, Facebook groups. I know Kevin and I have talked extensively about this, and that's a way to connect with that transitioning population to become an accessible talent pool for connecting with employers.
And then I know during my long tenure as a DVOP, a big thing that I tried to do was connect the dots. There are some dots that aren't connected, like the VBA and VHA, they're so different that when you're in the hospital and you're getting seen by these folks, and it was me, my personal story, I was like, I can't work, I can't stand up too long, I can't walk too far. No one ever mentioned the DVOP role, any of these great benefits. So I kind of was an advocate. I wanted any doctor in the Portland VA or any clinic to know my name or our program. That way, if they had a patient say anything about work, boom, here's a card, or tell them about our program. So that was one of the things I try to do. It's a center of influence, right? Get to those center of influences.
I also go to stand downs. I go to like the Portland Women's Expo. I go to different events around the state, to different fairs, and just any kind of event that comes to mind, I attend.
Any more questions pending? All right, turn it back to the panel. Jim, you got something?
Just a little more on the flip side of, we always remember we're always talking about the veterans transitioning out of the military, recently getting out of the military. But we just need to keep in mind there are a lot of veterans out there. And just from my own perspective of the work realm is we have a lot of veterans who've exited the military years ago, but right now they're veterans and they're looking for work or they're underemployed. And so we just want to make sure we keep those veterans in mind and see what we can do to help those vets.
I was going to turn it back to the panel, and I was going to ask each of you maybe to give us a favorite duty station or port you visited. What do you guys call it when you guys visited somewhere outside of the Navy? We call them port visits, but maybe somewhere you went that stands out. Go ahead.
I think I enjoyed all of my travels. I enjoyed probably everywhere I went. I started in New Jersey, went to Georgia, ended up in Seattle when it was, Seattle, Tacoma at their Army McCord. Did a short-term stay in Alaska, went and stayed in Germany, in Darmstadt, which is now closed. The most enjoyable thing I did, or most exciting thing I did, actually I'm airborne, which is a parachute train. So that is the most exciting thing I did and the most proud thing that I've done.
I think personally for me, favorite duty location was being in North Carolina at Great Barbecue and seeing First Flight, which is Kitty Hawk, so birthplace of American aviation.
For me, it would be U.S. Naval Hospital in Okinawa, Japan. I worked in the emergency department, and it's one of those. Sometimes I fantasize like the people that I got to work with. It's like maybe someday we'll form like a startup company and just work together again. But it was one of those experiences where I saw the same people pretty much 24/7. I worked with them, hung out with them, and it's just and it's mutual. I see we don't see each other. We see each other virtually, and it's a lot of that same feedback that I remember back in the day or this and that, and we just reminisce. And I would say that would be my favorite.
So when I was in, we just went to one place and stayed there until our 3-year enlistment was up, and you either re-enlisted and went somewhere else or you got out. and I did the second thing. But I went to basic in Fort Jackson, and then I went to Fort Lee for my AIT, my training, and then I went to Kitzingen, Germany, and that's where I was until I got out. And I was in Kitzingen, Germany, at Harvey Barracks, which was a pretty awful experience. But I loved being in Germany. I loved when I was there. I didn't come back to the United States. A lot of people would come back, and I just made the decision to stay in Europe and see Europe. And I think that was the best decision because I was 19, 20, 21, and I thought, when am I going to get another chance to see Europe, right? So I traveled all over Germany and Austria and France and just did that, and it was a fabulous experience. So for that, it was great.
So my favorite was in 1986, I got to participate in Team Spirit. And that was a joint military endeavor that they put on periodically, and it happened to take place in South Korea. And that's where Team Spirit was always held, was in South Korea to help protect our allies. At the time, I was working in the Air Transportable Hospital, and I was Radar. If anybody watched MASH, that was me in the Air Transportable Hospital, and we had an extraordinary time there. I had no idea what I was missing insofar as a culture-rich environment, and to be with people or to just find out about their culture. I found it a wonderful experience.
Well, I say 6 years Army, numerous duty stations. So I don't really have a particular favorite, but if I had to choose one, I don't know, there's like 3 of them. One was I was stationed in Cyprus, which is the Mediterranean. That was to do what they call the Beirut Air Bridge mission. And in fact, I was just sharing a story about my experience with that with a coworker. But that was a real nice experience, Mediterranean. I got to grow my hair out longer. So I was in more civilian clothes when I worked on the aircraft. So that was kind of, just kind of unique. Germany, I was stationed there for a little bit. It sounds crazy, but also, Iraq and Saudi Arabia and that whole area. The reason I think that's kind of interesting for me is that just the people I served with and just being there. Don't miss the hot weather and living out of a GP medium tent and a sand dune. So don't miss that at all.
All right, thank you, Jim. Now I'd like to conclude, and I would like to thank the panel for your honesty, for your bravery, for sharing, for enlightening, for guiding with your stories. And I'd like everybody maybe give a round of applause. And I want to thank everyone who attended, either virtually or in person. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your care. Thank you for your questions. And you guys have a great day.